When looking over a list of men's names in a foreign language, as of military officers or of authors who have written on a particular subject, I am reminded once more that there is nothing in a name. The name Menshikov, for instance, has nothing in it to my ears more than a whisker, and it may belong to a rat. As the names of the Poles and Russians are to us, so are ours to them. It's as if they had been named by the child's rigmarole: Iry Wiry, Ickery Van, Tittle Tan. I see in my mind a herd of wild creatures swarming over the earth, and to each the herdsman has affixed some barbarous sound in his own dialect. The names of men are, of course, as cheap and meaningless as Bose and Trey, the names of dogs. Welcome to episode 11 of the Peripatetics, a podcast about stillness for restless wanderers. In each episode, we walk in the footsteps of past thinkers, joining in the timeless quest to secure a more tranquil life from this busy world. And though the names of men are cheap and meaningless, and mine apparently is best suited to a dog, I am nevertheless your host, Trey Hill. It's supremely fitting that Thoreau uses my name to illustrate his point about the pointlessness of the names assigned to us at birth. How I introduce myself each episode doesn't match my birth certificate, but that small detail doesn't make Trey any less my name. Anyone else could follow any of 1,000 different trails off Thoreau's ideas on this topic of names. But to me, he left just one. Finding that my truest name once flowed from the tip of his pen seems to me a wayfinder, a sigil carved into literary stone, marking a trail meant for me to find. So this episode will be a journey down that path, through a few of the names I have answered to in my life. For a brief season in middle school, I was christened Salty Dog by my football coach, and it seemed to me no one had seen me clearly until that day Coach Moore renamed me. But that's a story for a little later on. Even this essay that we're exploring has a tenuous relationship with its name. Though Thoreau himself titled it Walking, it is often called not by its name, but by its theme, the wild. Our civilized names are a little like that. What we are called does not align precisely with who we are. Throughout the essay to this point, we've encountered various manifestations of this cruel and stifling injustice put upon our natures by the civilized world, as contrasted with the simple dignity we find thriving around every bend in untamed nature. So why should the names meant to tame us escape Thoreau's curiosity and particular lens? Your birth certificate, Thoreau suggests, may mark a name in permanent ink, but rarely does it hint at, let alone describe, your ever-evolving character. Shakespeare touched on this same idea through his most celebrated heroine. "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague." What's a Montague? Is it nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man? Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? Juliet famously muses into the night after realizing the man she loves bears the name of her family's chief rival. That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself. Through Juliet, I can't help but continue to interrogate the value of those names we foolishly inherit as enemies thanks to our family ties, our ideological identities, religious and political affiliations. The names we take and give so often obscure so much more than they reveal. To that point, I spent the last several months working on a large documentary project, the same work which has prevented me from writing and recording new episodes of this podcast. That work showed me just how tangled we still are thanks to the names we give one another. The production itself required me to spend 17 days on the road. My incredible crew and I traveled the country, exploring the fault lines of discontent that crisscross the United States right now. Our primary method was engaging in authentic conversations with everyday people. Our shooting schedule straddled the 2024 presidential election. While on the road, I heard a lot of name-calling, so it helped me to think like Juliet. Thou art thyself, though not a Republican, or a Democrat, or a trans ally, or a trad wife, or a dreamer, or a citizen, or a Trumper, or a never-Trumper. For some of these, 'tis but the name that is my enemy. And if these last few months taught me anything, it's the truth in Claude Monet's dictum that in order to see, we must forget the name of the thing we're looking at. For a peripatetic, though, that seems counterintuitive. After all, the name of this podcast traces all the way back to Aristotle, who was among the first to classify living organisms by observing their traits and behaviors as a way of capturing their essence. A couple thousand years later, Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist, expanded on that work, creating the system of binomial nomenclature, those two-part Latin names that organize the natural world by genus and species. Linnaeus is how you and I came to be known by the exact same name, at least generally. We are both Homo sapiens. In just a moment, Thoreau is going to argue on behalf of naming us even, as individuals binomially. In the gross, he says. By his own concept, he might not be known as Henry David Thoreau, but simply Philosophus Naturae, nature lover. And I might be in this way Luminus Quaesitor, the light seeker. With this argument, Thoreau, like Aristotle and Linnaeus, highlights the nature of a person by way of their relationship, and invites anyone who might find his name on a shelf or mine on some digital archive in 1,000 years to relate to those names properly. So what good would it do to lose sight of that relationship, as Monet suggests? Each of these great thinkers, I think, were after the same thing: clarity. Their ideologies and suggested methods may have differed, but their purposes were aligned. If you think about what Monet is saying, it's that the names we share for things come to us overburdened by assumptions, like layers of grime on the windshield of your car, preventing you from seeing clearly. In a way, both Thoreau and Monet are puzzling out a solution to the problem Shakespeare highlighted, that being a way to discard all this inherited bias. For Monet and Shakespeare and Thoreau, what mattered most was not order, but essence. And with that, we arrive right back to where Aristotle began. Thoreau tried to warn us. Half the walk is but retracing our steps. But this retracing isn't repetition, it's recognition. This quest for essence along the philosophic byways of nomenclature may be crisscrossed by myriad trails, marking where we've already been. But rarely do they name just what we've become by all this wandering. Since the time of Aristotle, we Peripatetics have sought nothing less than clarity about the world through which we walk, which I'm coming to suspect means it's time we get serious about forgetting all the names that we've been given. But as you'll see, to forget properly, we must first remember. Methinks it would be some advantage to philosophy if men were named merely in the gross, as they are known. It would be necessary only to know the genus, or perhaps the race or variety, to know the individual. We are not prepared to believe that every private soldier in a Roman army had a name of his own, because we have not supposed that he had a character his own. At present, our only true names are nicknames. On the first day of kindergarten, in the autumn of 1983, a few weeks before my 6th birthday, I hugged my mom at the door to my new classroom and walked inside. My teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had carefully written each of the names of her new students on a piece of tape she placed inside a square marked on the floor. When class was set to begin, she asked each of us to find our name and take a seat. One by one, my classmates sat. But I didn't see my name. I was the last kid standing, and the stress of not having my name on tape inside a square came out of me as tears. "What's your name?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Trey." "Hill?" she guessed. I nodded, smearing snot and tears around my puffy cheeks. "Well, here you are." She pointed to the only unclaimed square. I could read, and that square was for Thomas Hill. "That's not my name," I told her. You see, when my dad was in high school, he had a friend named Trey. But Trey wasn't that kid's name. It was his nickname, given because he was the third. And my dad, Thomas Hill Jr., decided that if he ever had a son, he would be the third Thomas Hill, and he would nickname that son Trey. As much as I adored my grandfather, Thomas Hill Sr., I have never in my life seen any inkling of myself in the name bequeathed to me in permanent ink on my birth certificate. My driver's license and passport and bank account and every other artifact of civilization will tell you that I am Thomas Hill. But I stand firm with 5-year-old Trey and Henry David Thoreau on this topic. Thomas is my father's name. It is not mine. At present, my only true name is a nickname. I knew a boy who from his particular energy was called Buster by his playmates, and this rightly supplanted his Christian name. Some travelers tell us that an Indian had no name given to him at first, but earned it, and his name was his fame. And among some tribes, he acquired a new name with every new exploit. It is pitiful when a man bears a name for convenience merely. Who has earned neither name nor fame? I will not allow mere names to make distinctions for me, but still see men in herds for all them. A familiar name cannot make a man less strange to me. It may be given to a savage who retains in secret his own wild title earned in the woods. We have a wild savage in us, and a savage name is perchance somewhere recorded as ours. As I said at the start, I once was christened by the savage name Salty Dog. I earned my wild title in the same woods I mentioned in episode 7, themselves nicknamed the Livable Forest. At Kingwood Middle School, I played football, despite being physically less mature than my classmates. In full pads, I weighed less than 100 pounds, so the coaching staff put me on the C team. You weren't put on the C team for your talent. It was reserved for the participation trophy kids, the leftovers, the unathletic. So no one on that team played their particular position for any strategic reason, which is how my bony ass ended up at defensive end, a position typically played by the strongest, fastest, most physically developed players. At that stage in my life, I carried a lot of unprocessed rage inside my small frame. Mostly, I was hurt by my parents' divorce. But showing sadness at 12 and 13 makes you socially vulnerable, whereas anger acts like a fortifying hedge of protection. I didn't care about what team I was on. I was small, but not dumb. I understood how things worked, and I didn't have much interest in getting killed on game days by guys whose balls had already dropped. That said, I looked forward to all things football, especially practice. The football field was a place where my negative emotions could leak out undetected. Often I found ways to let them fuel the kinds of physical feats of which no one thought my prepubescent body capable. On one crisp autumn afternoon at practice, the defensive linemen were separated off to run drills. We were learning a technique where, when the ball was snapped, you thrust your hands under the shoulder pads of the offensive lineman across from you, and on reading the direction the ball carrier was moving, you'd slip underneath this armpit of this giant to make the tackle. This was not the NFL. No one on that field would ever do anything meaningful in the game of football. But that didn't keep me from practicing like Rudy Rudiger, who Sean Astin would make famous in the movie Rudy a few years later. The ball was snapped. I stood up my man and watched as the coach handed it to my longtime friend, Michael Newlove, then slipped under the lineman's armpit, just as I was taught, and drove all of my rage into Michael's chest. The sound we made echoed with violence. I remember the whole thing feeling fantastic. Like Rudy, I jumped up and I jogged back to the huddle. But Michael didn't move. He couldn't breathe. When Coach Moore finally helped him to his feet, his shoulder pads, which were held together by a thick piece of plastic across his chest, sagged in the middle. I'd broken them. Coach Moore wheeled around and looked at me, grinning. "Crap, son, you're meaner than salt on an open wound. From now on, you're Salty Dog," which by the end of the season had been shortened to Salt. For several years, I carried that name like armor, proof that even my pain could have a sharp edge. Telling that story now, though, I wonder if Salt was ever really my name, or just a savage mask I wore to protect the part of me yet to discover all he could become. In therapy, I would learn how to be vulnerable. and recognize that vulnerability is, in my line of work as a writer and director, just as integral to my success as my anger once was to my survival. What is in a name, dear Juliet? Only our multitudes. I see that so clearly now, thanks to this act of remembering. That challenge Monet gave us at the start, to forget the names of things, even the names we used to carry or put on others. It wasn't a dismissal. His was an invitation to strip away the artificial filters we impose, to let the unbridled nature of everything shine through all the more clearly, even our own. On the other side of this unique kind of walk that I hope this episode inspires, traversing the topography of ourselves, we have a chance at catching sight of our essence in the wild, the one Thoreau imagines as the truest name of them all. Not one we are handed down or carry or wear stitched on the back of our jerseys, but one that emerges, like a great beast long hidden in an expansive valley, only if we first dare crest that higher hill. Once again, we see that seeking for that wildness within us is both our preservation and our salvation. I see that my neighbor, who bears the familiar epithet William or Edmund, takes it off with his jacket. It does not adhere to him when asleep or in anger, or aroused by any passion or inspiration. I seem to hear pronounced by some of his kin at such a time his original wild name, in some jaw-breaking or else melodious tongue. It feels good to be back, so thank you for listening to the Peripatetics. I'll be back again in a couple weeks with another episode, but in the meantime, it would mean a lot if you would leave a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, you can find me on Instagram at a name I chose for myself many years ago, at @9, which I've linked to in the show notes. If this episode has meant anything to you, commenting, sharing, or liking my posts about it helps as well. And if you post about the show, please tag me so I can share it. In our algorithmically driven world, it takes a village to grow an effort like this. Positive reviews, sharing with friends, really do go a long way in helping drive awareness for the show, which makes it easier for fellow walkers to find us, now and in the future. So, until next time, may your path be smooth and your pace steady.